Hello and welcome to Radio Waves. I'm your host, Kris Poliquin, and this is a production of Red Apples Media. We're broadcasting out of WLBE, Real Country, 790 AM out of Leesburg, Florida. And if you're watching us on television, you're doing so on Lake Sumter TV, Comcast Channel 13, Bright House 498, and Spectrum Channel 83. So today, I have invited Florida House Representative Anthony Sabatini to talk to us a little bit about himself, his role in the state legislature, and what it was like to, I don't know, for the first experience of walking into your first session. You know, for me, I'm kind of curious about that. I know it sounds ridiculous, but, you know, is it like going from elementary school to high school on your first day where you think you know what to expect and then it's not? So let's start making some waves. Representative Sabatini, thank you very much for taking time with a very busy day, I'm sure, and coming on to my show.
Well, thanks a lot, Kris. Appreciate you having me on. To answer your question, it was a great first session. You know, I always wanted to serve in the legislature, actually. Grew up here in Lake County. I went to high school at Eustis High School, and went up to tour FSU when I was a senior in high school, toured the Florida House of Representatives when I was about 17. Took a look around and said, wow, I wonder one day if I could serve in this body.
Really?
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. So 11 years later, I did. But it was obviously I did a lot of things before that. I really was not very political when I was that age. I just thought public service would be interesting and picked it up later. But to answer your question, yeah, it was a great session. Went into the session with big expectations. We had a brand new governor, brand new Speaker of the House and the Florida House, new Senate President. All had competing priorities, different visions, but with a lot of overlap. And so those three sort of main figures, with the backdrop of the rest of the legislature, kind of figured out what they wanted to do and basically hammered out a $91 billion budget and 195 policy bills. So we could talk about those if you'd like.
Absolutely. See, look, you're already primed. Now, there were a couple of bills that got through that, from what I read, you were actually excited about. Can you talk about some of those?
Yeah, there's lots of very exciting bills. I co-sponsored about 50 bills. I
really
filed about 10 bills. 6.
So you're already pretty active at this point.
Yeah, so I got 2 bills to the governor's desk. They're expected to be signed next week. One is a bill that makes it easier to sue a local government if it impedes on your property rights or intrudes on your rights in some way. And then the other bill is one that makes certain pharmaceutical drugs that contain CBD, cannabidiol, legal in Florida. So those made it to the desk. I got 4 bills that passed the House, but 2 of the 4 made it through also the Senate. 2 of them did not make it through the Senate.
Okay. Now you put a bill out to make CBD legal,
but
in medications.
A certain formula for it. So a certain pharmaceutical drug that's already been approved that contains it is now legal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's been descheduled. So it went from a Class 1 scheduled drug, which is illegal, to a Class 5 where it can be prescribed.
Okay. Well, that's kind of a big deal because that subject is, well, at the national, it absolutely is. And rightly so. Do you have any concerns, or what do you, in your experience, what have been your constituents' concerns on bills such as that? Or are there any?
There's
for that
a myth
matter?
that most people are still torn up about marijuana. 2/3 of voters want to legalize fully recreationally marijuana, and I support that. I'm the only Republican in the House or Senate that publicly endorses and promotes regulating marijuana and decriminalizing it. Surprisingly, I don't understand why there's still such a stigma.
Well, let me interrupt you. Why is that important to you?
Because
I mean, what do you see as the actual benefits? Because
sure,
we obviously have long lists of all the negatives that may or may not be necessarily true. Let's be honest, really. I mean, some things are blown out of proportion.
Yeah,
but what can you say? Why is it important to you to, I don't want to say desensitize it, poor choice of words, but to legalize it, make it recreational?
So let me back up and start at the beginning. So when you're doing lawmaking, you come in with a set of principles and a philosophy of lawmaking, what you believe and what you want to do and how and why you do it. And for me, my ultimate principle is liberty and freedom. It's all about liberty and just letting people live their lives. I trust people. I trust the free market. I don't trust the government. And so before I would even get near the question of what are the benefits of marijuana, should we, allow the people to have this right to smoke marijuana, I start by looking at it from my utmost principle of what compelling reason should the government have to take away the rights of people? And one of those rights, of course, is being able to use marijuana if they wish to. And if a person wants to use marijuana, I think it's insane that we would put that person in jail, that we would spend money on police to take that person, put them in a jail, pay their jail bill, put them through the legal system, and ostensibly ruin their life. It's actually completely insane to me. So first and foremost, it violates my liberty principles. But if you want to talk about the benefits, there's enormous medical benefits that have already been well documented. Sure. That people largely agree on in the medical scientific community, namely the CBD ingredient within cannabis. But above and beyond that, if you want to talk about the utilitarian benefits, just getting people out of the criminal system. 50% of these people, I worked with a lot of public defenders. Public defenders, 50% of their cases, people coming in, it's marijuana, small amounts of marijuana.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's out of control. So we're putting people in the legal system at various ages, really harming them if they're getting in their young ages because they're using marijuana. In no way does my policy perspective on it actually, mimic my opinion of marijuana. I've been a National Guardsman for 11 years. I get drug tested 30 to 60 days, every 30 to 60 days. I actually really don't even like marijuana. When I experimented in high school, I did not enjoy it and never used it again. But in no way would I allow that to shape my perspective on it. I think I try to take an objective approach towards it, and I think if somebody doesn't like it, it should have no bearing on their policy that they try to offer.
Right, and it kind of, again, I think you hit the liberty. Mm-hmm. Right now, you also spoke about being the opportunity to I don't want to put words in your mouth, but sue local government. Mm-hmm. Basically for infringement. Did I hear you correctly?
Yeah, so let me back up and give a little context
can you
to that.
Go into that a little bit?
So one of the bills I got to the governor's desk is expected to be signed is House Bill 829. And that's a bill that basically says if a local government has a law that has been preempted, and that's a fancy way of saying it's been taken away already, it's not allowed by the state government. So the state said no more local rules on this subject matter.
Okay.
Right? For example, we have a rule in Florida, state legislative statute, that says we're not going to have competing and differing minimum wages around the state of Florida. We're going to have one minimum wage in Florida, just to give you a random example.
Sure.
Criminal law, same thing. We're not going to have, Miami, this is a crime, and then Lauderdale, this is not a crime, that kind of thing. We want a uniform policy that's predictable in the state of Florida.
Understood.
Well, local governments are still creating laws because, a lot of times the voters want it in those small jurisdictions, cities and counties, places like Miami, Coral Gables, Gainesville. Generally, in my perspective, some of the more liberal cities and counties want things that they're not allowed to have, which are regulations at the local level that have been preempted by the state. And what happens is when those regulations go into effect, when they draft the ordinance at the local level, and ostensibly is the law, you have to sue them to get rid of it. So if you're a property owner and they've come up with a local regulation that's been preempted by the state, you have to literally sue them to strike that local law, even though it's against the law per the state statute. Yeah. So my bill made it that when you do hire an attorney and sue them, that attorney will get their attorney's fee, so you don't have to pay a dime, and you have an incentive to get rid of these bad laws that are on the books.
Now, see, I like that.
It's common sense.
I really do. It
seems
like common sense. Why do I need to pay additional or funds out of my own pocket? Mm-hmm. To stop you from doing something you shouldn't have done in the first place.
Exactly.
And again, we're talking contradictions.
Exactly. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Local government almost all the local governments in Florida have been created by the state legislature. A lot of people don't know that. They don't really wonder where
See,
local
again, a
government
lot of
comes
people
from.
take for granted what they think they know and what they don't know.
Yeah, local government, 67 counties, 412 cities in Florida. Almost every single one was created by the legislature. So they're regulated by the legislature. They're limited by the legislature. And in a sense, they have to obey the legislature. The state is the fundamental political jurisdiction of the entire American system. The state created the local governments, also created the federal government.
Right.
So,
So
that's the origin of it.
were there any bills that you still feel passionate about that you didn't get passed, that you're working towards? I guess I don't want to say keep pushing, but that you're looking forward to in the future of trying to get passed?
Sure, yeah. So two of the bills that passed the Florida House of Representatives but did not make it through the Senate because they were heavily lobbied against by special interests. The first one was House Bill 1. So if it has a high bill number, it's considered an important bill. It was actually literally number 1 this session. It's an overbearing ethics reform bill. It was a priority of the Speaker of the House. It's a bill that basically said that if you're dealing in the state budget as a representative, and I'm putting a bunch of appropriations requests in. I got a bunch of money for Special Olympics in Lake County. I got money for Life Streams Behavioral Center. I got money for Lake Sumter College. If I'm getting money for these different entities, and I named government entities in that example, but I could easily get it for nonprofits, that sort of thing.
Right.
If I'm getting money to any of these people, I shouldn't have some special relationship with those people that I'm getting money from them, like a job with them or whatever.
Right.
So they're conferring some benefit on me in exchange for
There's a word for that.
Exactly. Well, corruption. And so that's what this bill would have done. It would have actually created massive disclosures and in some cases prohibitions on the kinds of relationships legislators can have with entities they're getting money from and other entities they would have sorts of conflicts with. And the bill was just a sunshine law. It would make you disclose these kind of relationships.
Sure.
And passed the House, but the Senate doesn't like it very much. And to be completely frank, the Senate, a lot of senators come out of the Florida Senate and they get cushy jobs with certain entities that have power and sway in the state of Florida. And so they don't want to have to disclose the fact that they're in solicitation talks, because part of the bill would have said if you're soliciting a job with them, you have to put that out there in the public view.
And that's not already the case.
No, it's not the case. Well, so that bill has one of the characteristics that I love in it. The bills I love the most always have this one similar characteristic, which is when someone explains to me the bill, I go, that's not the law already?
Right.
Right?
Just if it seems like common sense, then I can back that.
Exactly. What you just said was my expression, right? So a lot of my favorite bills where, people have ideas. They come to me, whether they're citizens, people working in the legislature already, lobbyists, they're good lobbyists, ideas, and you sort through them. But I know I want to do a bill when somebody reads it to me and explains it to me, and I say, how is that not the current law in Florida? Why wouldn't that be the law? So those are the bills I try to file. So that's one.
We need to take a quick break. When we return, we'll continue our conversation with Representative Sabatini. We'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to Radio Waves. Again, I'm your host, Kris Poliquin. So before the break, we were talking about Representative Anthony Sabatini on his first session at the state legislature. And I'd kind of like to continue with that to a certain extent, because I want to inquire to you about the alcohol bill and get more information, because I'm not exactly sure what it was you were trying to achieve, and I'm really not all that sure why the Senate decided not to pass it.
Sure. So another one of my favorite bills passed the House, failed the Senate. It was heavily lobbied against. Was a bill that basically would have modified and put a big dent in what we call the three-tier system in Florida. So we have an arbitrary law from the 1930s. Literally, the statute's from
1930s.
1935 is the original statute, Chapter 561.12, if I'm not mistaken. We call it Tide House Evil. It's an old statute that says if you create alcohol, if you manufacture alcohol, you cannot distribute it. If you distribute it, you cannot manufacture it or retail it. If you retail it, you can't do the other two things. Basically, we created 3 silos to say if you make alcohol, distribute it, or sell it at the point of sale, like in a store. Those 3 businesses have to be separate. You cannot be involved with more than one of those. And it's completely arbitrary and doesn't make any sense. But it was created because there was a perceived evil at the advertising of alcohol in the 1930s. This is coming right after Prohibition.
Sure.
So people were suspicious about it. And so they created this arbitrary legal framework that's impeded the industry in many ways. And states that have started to chip away at this weird old legal paradigm have seen benefits. So like in New York and California, states are just saying, okay, anyone can sell alcohol. You can create it and sell it at your store or whatever. And
they have.
And they have, yeah.
Okay,
So small businesses and some of the states that have friendlier laws are growing very big, and they're becoming mega brands. So like distilleries, breweries, wineries, and these other states with friendlier, less laws. And those are states that are known to have more regulations and more control.
I was about to say, we're talking New York again as an example.
Well, they were easy. I think they had a different view towards traditional vice-type items like alcohol, and so therefore they took, actually, I think, a more enlightened approach on it.
Gotcha.
And so, it's a niche issue. How many people in Lake County, in my district, really know or are interested in this issue? But the truth of the matter is, I'm a state legislator, and I'm trying to make laws that are best for Florida. And these laws actually impede people from getting into the marketplace all over the state. We actually have 2 craft distilleries here in Lake County. One is in Yalaha. It's called Yalaha Distillery.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, it's called Yalaha Bootleg Company. Nifty name. And then the other one's in Umatilla, and that one's very well known. It's called Palm Ridge Whiskey. Mm-hmm. And that's a very good whiskey. But anyways, these are small business people that are just being elbowed out and restricted by arbitrary laws that are being protected. You wonder who's protecting this system. The system is benefiting people on the status quo, people who are already invested in the system. They don't want any competition. So beer distributors do not want other people being able to sell their product in the market.
On their own.
Mm-hmm. And so the lobbyists poured an enormous amount of money into the legislature, people's political committees, to try to kill the bill. And the Senate killed it because they're trying to deal with all the different stakeholders, and they're influenced by people who made, I think, a lot of political donations.
Wow. Well, and that's kind of our political climate, or has been, at least as long as I've been. You're always suspect of shady dealings. Mm-hmm. It's big government, shame, but not necessarily true in all cases. Mm-hmm. But that perception is still there. Mm-hmm. It's actually a pretty good segue. Can you talk to me? Let's talk about some of the future bills that you're looking at trying to put out there and get passed. One of them specifically is the Sunshine Law for local government. Mm-hmm. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what your vision for that should or should not be? Or what the bill is, I should say.
Well, that was actually, believe it or not, that was the House Bill 1 ethics bill that we discussed. That's the bill that really speaks to that exact subject.
Okay, perfect. Because I was talking to, I know some locals. I like my Mount Dora area. Mm-hmm. And it does seem very constrictive that 2 people on the same board who can't talk to each, you can't. Yeah. How do I know why something's important and passionate to you if it has to be in a boardroom setting? I'm not saying that you can't get your ideas and stuff across.
Let's talk about that. Do
you understand what I'm getting at? Okay.
Yeah, before we dive into that, I want to make a mention. I think it's interesting. So far, we've only spoke about 3 things: marijuana, alcohol, and ethics. Which I think.
What would you like to talk about? We can talk about anything you like.
I love that combination. It's just ironic and interesting.
ATV, so we need alcohol. But okay, we'll get the firearms.
Ethics, liquor, marijuana.
Right.
So Sunshine Law in Florida is interesting. It's benefited the state because it's allowed the public to basically go to all these public meetings. There cannot be closed-door meetings except in extreme circumstances. And all public records, there's a very high standard for how public record, any government record has to be. It has to be accessible to everybody and easily accessible. But we have this weird dichotomy in the law. We have this weird problem in the law where the state legislature doesn't have the same rules as the local government. So I can go meet with my fellow legislative partners in small settings and talk about bills and then go present them and work on them and amend them and all that. But the local governments can. And so I believe it or not, I've been considered a critic of local government only because I'm a critic of all government. But one thing that I think local governments will be pleased to know, I plan on working on the legislatures, I want to get rid of this arbitrary law that says 2 city commissioners or 2 county commissioners aren't allowed to talk to each other. We've trusted these people to make our decisions. We've trusted them to set our budget, take our money, and create a better community for us to live in. I think I trust them to actually speak to each other. And so in the 1970s,
And if not,
yeah,
we can get,
exactly, yeah, and there'll be something bad if something bad does happen. Which I mean, it's been the case that we've allowed the legislature to have those meetings forever, and obviously Florida, I think, is in good shape. I think we should allow the same rules for the local government officials at the same time. So I plan on proposing an amendment to the Sunshine Law to allow local governments to meet and discuss, because right now when they go into the public meetings, they're never on the same page, and it's enabled government staff to have all the power because they do not have to abide by the Sunshine rules. So our elected officials have their hands tied, and it's very difficult to do lawmaking in just exclusively public meetings.
Right.
But the staff really, I think, is benefited by the restriction we put on the government officials because they don't have to do that. So they really make all the decisions, and they just kind of, whisper in all 5 commissioners' ear, this is what we're going to do. And staff really runs the show, and that's a problem. We can't have government staff making all the decisions. They should be working for the elected representatives, not making the rules. And that's sadly the case, I think, in most cities.
And I think I can get on board with that because it never really made sense. No. Most of my shop talk where we worked out problems were at the shop getting a quick cup of coffee before the next meeting. And to know that these officials they're not allowed
No, they're not allowed
to meet for fear of. And I understand why it was put in place, backdoor deals. But we can't live in fear of that forever, in my opinion. Now, I want to.
Well, let me say one thing on that, just to finish off. So, to understand any law, why it's being proposed, or if it's good, it's definitely important to understand the history. So, the history of the Sunshine Laws came out of the early 1970s when Florida was much more corrupt. Pre-technology, you didn't know what was going on at these meetings. And the Supreme Court, in fact, 2 to 3 of the 7 Florida Supreme Court justices, considered the most ethical, highest court in our land, actually had to resign for corruption scandals. So there was an enormous amount of corruption in the early 70s, and so that's when they implemented a lot of these ethics bills and requirements. And there's been good results, but I believe it has been an overcorrection, and it's overburdened, local government. So we got to make sure that they can at least have some elbow room to meet and discuss issues. Well,
you made a comment just a couple of moments ago about just the topics. I want to shift gears, but it's still going to be under ethics, I think. But let me ask you about the media specifically, because you tend to be a favorite, at least for Florida, In today's climate, how do you view the media? I mean, good, bad, has it treated you good? Has it treated you bad? Are we going over the top or one direction too much, the other?
It's hard to characterize all the media because it's this obviously monolithic entity. But some have been very fair to me. Some I think has been extremely unfair, purposely, deliberately unfair, not just unintentionally, but trying to obviously attack people with more conservative, traditional Republican beliefs versus somebody on a agenda that they believe in. But overall, media it's a business, and I like that. It's a private business. Let them function the way they do. I just hope that people are more skeptical about what they read. People are so quick to post and reshare something without actually evidencing it. As soon as they see a headline on social media or the news or Google, they think, okay, this is a news agency. I can believe this. And that's lent the media to do abusive things because they have a traditional trust that the American public has put into them for 100 years since there's been really modern media, early 20th century, up until Walter Cronkite is probably the height of that going forward. And it's being destroyed because I think media is taking advantage of the fact that the media still believes them. Of course, we've seen this huge pullback and people have lost trust, and I think that's well-deserved because the media really is not overall, I hate to characterize all the media, but a lot of them have abused their privilege of a presumption of trust and
Right.
truth. They've abused it. And so that's been my opinion. I think the majority have abused it.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And that's all the time we have for today's show. Mr. Sabatini, thank you so much for taking the time again and coming on and sharing this information with our audience.
Thanks.
All right. And that'll wrap us up. I'm your host, Kris Poliquin, and we'll see you next time.